powered by Riverside.
Hello, everyone, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Thank you so much for tuning in, whether you're mowing the grass right now or changing diapers. Welcome to the Young Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Jay, and today I have a special guest with me. I have Joe. Joe's a dad, a master's level therapist, and a sex educator who specializes in the intersection between adolescent, sexuality, and technology. So, Joe, first and foremost, welcome to the Young Dad Podcast.
Thanks, Jay. Happy to be here.
Super excited to have you. Before we jump too into it, I'm super excited for the conversation we're going to have today. But you probably noticed that I'm wearing like a really cool polo. If you're looking on the video on like Spotify or YouTube or wherever you get your video podcast, this polo right here is from a brand that we have been working with and partnering with for a very long time with the podcast, For Fathers Clothing. This is the Dog Dad polo. If you zoom in on your phone, if you start looking real close, I'm not going to pull my camera down. Actually, yeah. You can see just the detail on this polo. Dog treats, dog collars, tennis balls, leashes, dog bowls, slippers that they chew up, dog food. The detail on these polos is absolutely incredible by For Fathers. For Fathers is by dads, for dads. They're amazing shirts for the office, for work, for your next family gathering, for everything in between. Everything from politics to baseball to mowing the grass. They have something for a little bit something for everyone. You have a son or a daughter that likes to wear polos and loves to match with dad. Guess what? They have me and daddy and me polos too, which is awesome because how many brands have daddy and me stuff? So I think that's super cool that they do that, and I absolutely love working with them. If you go down to the description of this episode or my link tree on any of my social medias, you'll see a discount code to For Fathers for 20% off of your entire order. Help support the podcast. It helps keep it so that we can work with great brands like For Fathers. So please go order one. You can look as good as I do, or you can try at least. Joe, enough about me, enough of the business. Can you tell us a little bit about you and what inspired you to start doing the work that you do now?
Wow, that's a great question. I actually don't really remember anything different than that. I've been working with teenagers since I was one. I went to a really cool progressive high school, and there was a handful of us that were trained to work with other kids in the school. So if a kid didn't want to talk to a grown-up, they could come and talk to us. And we got direct supervision from like master's level therapists. It kind of put me on a track and made me think I could change the world and make it better. But I've literally been working with teenagers since I was like 17 or something.
That's awesome. So how did you get into sexuality and sex education?
I hadn't thought about that for a long time either. That's actually kind of a cool story, I think. I had originally been working in group homes with like adolescent gang members and addicts, things like that in New Mexico. And then I moved up to Washington State and applied for a job in a group home doing the same kind of work. But they only had a part-time position. So one part-time was like the Hispanic, like adolescent gang members and addicts in one cabin. And then like in this other cabin down the hill, there were kids that had like sexual behavior issues. And so they said, well, why don't you split time in both places? And then when we get a full-time position, we'll just stick you in there. So I said, okay. And I was, early 20s, really young. But I was really fascinated working with kids around sexuality stuff, like so much more interesting. I felt like I was being so much more helpful. You can kind of see them making changes and choices, and, the shot him because he had a red hat on. Like, you can only kind of go so far with that conversation sometimes. A position came up in both houses at the same time. And I said, I'm actually going to kind of jump ship and do this. And so I've been kind of working in the sexuality field since then.
That's really cool. So it's so unique, that field, teenagers, sexuality. A lot of parents, myself included, well, maybe not myself, because my kids are very young. That's a bridge I don't have to cross for many years from now, hopefully. And I'm very grateful that I'm not there right now. But there's a lot of parents, when it comes to that topic, it's like very scary. Birds and the bees, it's it's scary. It's overwhelming. It's just nerves. Just thinking about it right now, knowing that I'm like years out with my daughters from having those like conversations, which is what I 100% will be taking the approach of like these are conversations that we're gonna have. It's not just gonna be a one time cool, we
Yep.
get it, we're good. It's ongoing conversations that develop over time, that develop with age. Obviously, the conversation right now with them being so young is like, hey, you know that God's a safe person. You know that my wife or stepmom, we were safe people for you. You can talk to us about anything. If anyone's ever hurting you, if you're ever wanting to hurt yourself, or if you have a plan to hurt other people, um, where you can talk to me about it all the time. That's a conversation now. That's going to evolve into that conversation later. But let's just ask a hypothetical here. What is the best way to, I guess, for a parent who hasn't had that conversation yet, who probably needs to, maybe is a little overdue, maybe is coming up on that pre-puberty age, that 10, 11, 12-ish age where it kind of starts for boys and for girls. What's kind of the lead in, start of that conversation kind of could that look like?
I totally get that. It can be super intimidating, especially because, a lot of people, like our age, like coming up, like we didn't have great role models. Like a lot of our parents really sucked at those conversations. And so we're kind of reinventing a wheel, so to speak. And the world looks totally different now, right? Because there's like technology folded into this. Like you can't talk about sex without talking about technology anymore. And you can't talk about technology without talking about sex anymore. They're sort of like linked together in a way that I think we'll never really be able to unlink them. So it's a whole different landscape that we have to be talking about. But when I talk about this with parents, I kind of try to reassure people like it's never too late to start the conversations. I think it's best to start early, but you can kind of jump in and start anytime. And if you're having a really hard time with it, like a great hack is to let the kids lead. So ask them what they know, ask them what they think, ask them, especially even with littles, like with my son, what's the baddest bad word, like what's something that you heard on the playground that your friends told you that you think can't possibly really be a real thing. Those kinds of questions led to really fantastic conversations.
Okay. So just kind of opening it up, like, here, the floor's yours. Let's talk about all these things that you probably have questions about. And I think I love that you brought up the technology piece of it, because thanks to there's a great documentary on Netflix right now. This is the beginning of June. The Ashley Madison
Oh yeah.
documentary is out right now. I have yet to watch it. My friends Laura and Steven, hosts of the Midday Musings podcast, they did a fantastic like 2-part episodes on the Ashley Madison documentaries, and it's only like 1 or 2 episodes in right now, so it's like a docuseries, and I'm like, I want to start watching that because it sounds super interesting. But ever since like the
Yeah.
inception of like Instagram and Snapchat, and then evolution into dating apps and things like that, like the technology part's a big piece of it. And guess what else your kids have access to on this technology? Information. Unlimited information from all the sources in the world, that if they don't get it from most likely their most trusted source in you, their parents, they're going to get it from their friends. They're going to get it through trial and error, or they're going to get it off the internet. And when it
Yeah.
comes to the whole field of sexuality and sex, well, those sites are pretty straightforward for what they're going to be offering your child and adolescents at in that realm. So
Yeah. And, kids who don't know what they're trying to figure out or don't know exactly what question they're trying to ask, like all of those roads lead directly to pornography. So,
mhm.
and I'm not against porn in a big picture kind of way, but porn with kids, it just creates tons of problem. The bulk of my practice is like kids having problems because of pornography stuff.
Yeah,
So
and I think that leads into like a really good segue here. Like, we think of like the existence today for a lot of kids when you think of technology and just existing, is that it can be really lonely, like super lonely. Like, I have a very small group of friends, and that's mostly by choice, but at times like that can feel lonely. My wife's my best friend. She's incredible. I go to her for everything. And so I'm never like alone or like lonely, like between her and my kids, like life's fantastic and I'm more than fulfilled in those areas. But when I think like socially and like friends and stuff, like, man, who do I who do I like call and hang out with? Like who is there for me kind of thing. It can be a very lonely thing, especially for kids now, because friendships end and start in the blink of an eye, and then they start again, or then they end again. It's like so in and out, up and down. And when we put it in the context of sexuality and technology, how is loneliness like almost increased? In my opinion, I think it's increased. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it kind of depends on the kid and what they're doing with the screens. I think I spent a lot of time sort of balancing out those messages that people are getting about, technology unraveling the fabric of America and things like that. Like there's definitely like bad news when it comes to screen time. But there's a lot of good news out there as well. And so, there's science around the fact that texting can be really beneficial, especially for kids who are a little bit lonely or who lean kind of shy and introverted. Like talking to someone through their screen is actually helps them kind of open up a little bit like that. There's ways that people can find connection now through our screens that we didn't have access to in the 80s and the 90s. And so it can become a lonely existence if it's a kid, for example, that like lets their screen or their device become that friend for them and that sole sense of source of entertainment or self-esteem. But if you can use your screen to access other things that you can be social with, get your self-esteem needs met, connect to other actual human creatures, it's a really, really great thing. Right.
100%.
I think just
100%.
even like the pandemic, right? Like our screens saved us,
Yeah.
between Amazon, Uber Eats, Zoom, right? If we had to do that, everyone stay home for 2 years, basically in 1987 or something like that, like that would have been a
Everyone,
total stain. Like it would have like destroyed the world.
I don't
But,
think it would have been
I think,
possible back then, honestly. Like,
yeah,
I don't think people would have followed it. I think there would have been a lot more chaos and like rebellion against like government and stuff. Like, they're like, what? No, no, I'm gonna go hang out with my neighbors. I'm gonna go next door. I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna go eat. I'm gonna go to the store. I'm not gonna let this affect me to the same
right.
degree. So I think you put it in context of 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's totally different the reaction of the people than it would have been and when it did happen.
Yeah. But I think, our screens did really good things for us through that. There's always the abyss that someone can fall into, but generally I
Mhm.
put, technology in the same category as like weapons or cars or Chardonnay, right? Like whiskey. Like it's not bad in and of itself. It's what you do with it that can be terrible. Right?
Yeah, it's like how much of it you consume and what are you consuming while you're like on it kind of thing.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
like there's a lot of great ways to consume media. Like there's a lot of good forms of media out there. Of course, you find the things that you're interested in and then you can go down rabbit holes and you can really fulfill yourself in a lot of very fulfilling ways between Instagram, Threads, Pinterest, Twitter, or sorry, X, my bad. Sorry, Elon. And you Reddit, even though Reddit's I don't know about Reddit. It's great, but it's not also great. And there's a ton of video
Right.
games. There's a ton of good video games. It's really up to the user and how they use it. As long as the users are our kids, and as long as we help them be well informed of the positives and the negatives of it, there has to be again that conversation. I feel like that is going to be a running
Exactly.
theme for us today
I
with
was
that
just thinking that.
conversation. You have to
Like
have that
with my
conversation
kids,
around it.
when my kids were growing up, like we had conversations about that, like, limiting screen time, right? But then it was like, well, what if I'm reading on my Kindle? Like, my kids are like, does that count as screen time? I'm like, well, that is different screen time than playing Angry
Hmm.
Birds was, right? Like, those are different things, right? If they're playing, my son learned how to play chess and had this huge, like, group of friends and they all played chess and it was amazing. And that felt different to me than just
Hmm.
like scrolling on Instagram, right? Like there's different flavors of screen time to take into account too. Like what are you doing with those screens? How much are you doing? Who are you connecting with when you're doing it, if anybody at all? And then, what kind of screen time are you doing? I think
100%.
those are important questions in terms of that conversation. Like those are kind of points to hit in those.
Yeah, and I think you also have to consider like your own family values and stuff as well into that. Like where are the family values that you have instilled or taught or wanting to instill with your kids? Are you trying to instill in them? Okay, we as a family, we prefer more outdoor, disconnected kind of things, or no, we're more homebodies and we're okay with, some extra TV time or watching shows and movies together and maybe be having the TV on as background noise while the kids just play with their toys kind of thing. Even that's different, because my oldest daughter, she does that where she has the TV on and it's just purely background noise. Like she's fully focused on doing, let me just give an example, like sorting her Pokemon cards. She's fully focused on sorting her Pokemon cards, but she has the TV on just as like that background noise. And that to me is different. Like she's not just sitting there watching the TV, staring off into the abyss
Right.
of Richie Rich or whatever the heck she's watching, or Pokemon or whatever she's
Because I
watching.
do that too. I often
Yeah,
will have like a movie or something on in the background while I'm doing stuff.
100%. Like I do the same thing, podcasts or
Yeah,
audiobooks, or except obviously while I'm doing something like this, because that would be a little bit too much stimulation. I don't think I can handle multiple things like that. But I mean, I do it when I sleep. I have a sound machine. My wife and I, we have a sound machine in our room. My kids have a sound machine in their room, just for that background noise to kind of drown out the other sound of home and like life and things like that. So that's something I really enjoy. But you mentioned you're a dad, and obviously I mentioned that as well. What do these conversations when it comes to technology and sexuality and these things look like for you as a dad in your parenting personally?
well, I've been doing this work for a long time, and like I said, kind of started out in focusing on sexuality, and then at some point technology got mixed into that and super connected. So a lot of my conversations became about technology as well, and so I had definitely heard a lot of horror stories by the time my kids were coming into the age where they can start interacting with screens and having their own devices. And it became really important to me to make sure I was like walking my talk. Like I didn't want to, be speaking in a group at a conference and giving parents a bunch of advice and then doing something different at home. So, we had really kind of clear boundaries and rules at my house with my kids growing up. And, and it's hard. Like there's times when you don't want to have rules or life can be a little bit easier. We would have screen free nights at my house a couple nights a week, right? We just didn't do anything with the screens, but then the kids go to bed, and then maybe my wife and I watch a movie, and then the kid comes down for a glass of water, and they're like, "It's a screen-free night. What are you guys doing?" And then you have to have that conversation. Like those kinds of things were sort of hard, but I think that's how it kind of played out with me. Like just making sure I was like walking the talk that I do and doing what I encourage other parents to do as well.
Definitely. And I think that's at least for me, like we both do very similar things for work. You're a master's level therapist. I'm a agency affiliated counselor. Different levels. I'm working on my master's. I'm almost at that level. I'll be there soon.
Nice.
Um, but regardless of that, like it, it, it can be really hard to walk those walks sometimes. Especially when you talk about it all day with other people. I find myself a lot saying like, oh yeah, well I can teach this concept to parents, I can explain it to these parents, I can instill it in them, and I obviously I know what to do, I know how to do it, but for some reason there's like a disconnect there, for some reason, and there's a struggle. And so you do have to be really careful. You have the things that you're saying to your children, you have to make sure that those are the things that you're also doing and following as well, because they'll take it very serious, and then that also then loses the effect later. If you say it's a screen free night, they'll be like, okay, dad, sure, it's a screen free night until we go to bed,
Yeah.
sure, whatever kind of thing. So they'll kind of put that back on you. So kids are smart, so we got to be cautious in that way. But I think that kind of leads into some of the things that you mentioned to what it means to you to be a dad, between being a leader, witness, protector, and a container. Wasn't sure what you meant by the container piece of that, but please elaborate on those things and how, these are kind of the guiding principles of how you are as a dad, it seems.
Yeah, I think, you know, it is different raising kids in the world right now, right? I think there was like, I think that in terms of, talking about kids who were like in the Gen Z cohort, right? Like the difference between that generation and that generation's parents, I think, is the biggest leap in culturally, I think, between any generation that's ever happened. Like their childhood looks very different than what our childhood looks like. And so I try to resist going in, even though, like, I'm an expert with parents and, I've had a lot of life experience and all this education or whatever. I don't want to go barreling into this world with my kids thinking I know everything, right? I know how this works. I think I've got a good grasp on stuff. I think in a lot of ways, kids do all the things that kids have always done since the beginning of the time. But because of technology and the way that the world works right now in terms of connectivity, it's just a whole different thing. And so my job is to get really clear about what our values are, right? Take the information that I know about child development and parenting, and then just I literally think of it as just holding like an arena, right? And letting them figure stuff out and watching for the edges where like stuff can get really serious. I don't know if we can cuss on here.
Oh yeah, you can cuss. No, it's fine. There's a little button that I can push when I post it that says explicit, and then it'll put like a little icon. So like, it's fine. I should really put that out there sooner, ahead of time.
I'll try to control myself. I'm a cusser, but just waiting, like looking for the places where like the things are going to be serious. Like there's like somebody could get hurt or something like that. And in between there, letting kids kind of figure out some of their own way, some of their own values, some of their own lessons. And it's my job as a parent, I think, to just sort of hold that space for them and keep eyes on and keep it safe. Right. And
Definitely.
Like much like monitoring their online activity, right? I don't need to be controlling it. I don't need to be there while they're doing everything, but I need to have some way that I can kind of tell what they're doing and understand where the lines are that I definitely don't want them crossing and keep my eyes there. That makes sense. That's kind of what I think about when I say sort of witnessing and holding the container.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. I get it. I'm not sure if the listeners get it. And if I try to recap it, I'm not going to do it justice. But it makes...
I think anybody who has like parents, boomer parents, who can come in sometimes and give their advice and say, well, back in our day, we did this and this. And it's like, well, thanks, Mom, but that's not really how it works anymore.
Yeah,
that kind of stuff.
Help me.
Yeah, dealing with our kids, dealing with Gen Z the way that our parents dealt with us is just not going to work. It's not going to fly. It's almost a different language. Parenting is now.
Definitely. And I think it's interesting for me because like I was raised primarily by my grandmother, who was born in the 1950. She was born in 1950. So I was raised by her when she was already in her 40s. And so I'm a millennial. And so then she raised me as her kids were already grown, obviously. But then she raised me for 14 years. And that was so different and such an experience because like I was raised the same as like my biological mom, my uncle, and my aunt were, but like with a twist almost, but not like a lot of a twist. It's a very slight twist. But then obviously those people, my uncle and my aunt primarily, were still in my life. So it's like I was kind of being like raised the same way, but by like 3 different people, but like differently as well. Like because my aunt had her kids, so she was trying to change things. And her situation's really interesting because me and my 2 cousins were older, but then they have 2 younger siblings who are 14 and 16 now kind of thing. So there's a significant like 15, 16-year age gap between us.
Oh, wow.
She has 2 sets of kids in 2 different generations. She has millennial kids and she has Gen Z kids. So that's a whole thing. And then for me, after I was raised by her, then I lived with my dad, who was, born in the 70s. So he's the next generation from there kind of thing. So then I was raised that way, but that wasn't until I was a teenager. And now I have my kids now. I'm trying to put all that together from all these different pieces. So I think it's a strategy because like there's some of that old school stuff. There's some of that newer stuff. There's some of the stuff I've integrated from like my work and things like that. But no, I can see what you're saying here. So I'm grasping it.
Yeah, that's really interesting though. Like, sounds like you had lots of influences from lots of different sort of generational cultures, all like focused on you.
Yeah, and I can tell you those generational things, they travel fast. and they travel hard.
And probably some really like amazing like values and lessons that you learned and perspectives that you got. And still maybe not super helpful in focusing on your own kids too.
100%. I would say probably the most beneficial thing is like work ethic. It's like work ethic, big value, honesty, big value. You work hard, you do the things you're supposed to do. You say you're going to be somewhere, you're there. If you're on time, you show up, you do the things that you say you're going to do, and you keep your commitment, kind of thing, until they're done.
Right.
And so even now when my daughter's like, I want to quit this thing, that sucks. You're not quitting. That's a bummer because I paid for it, so I'm not wasting my money, which is kind of that older kind of thing where it's like, well, I worked really hard for this money and I'm spending it on you, kind of thing. And we're going to finish this, which is kind of something I got from my dad, which is more like, hey, we signed up, you committed, you're going to finish this out, kind of thing. Like, I'm not going to let you give up.
Yeah. And those kinds of things I think don't necessarily change. Those bigger values, right? About like stick to itiveness, make commitments, keep your promises, like that kind of stuff. And the world didn't look very different, I guess. I mean, it was different, but like the 90s to the 70s, like not a huge difference, right? But from the 90s to now, like everything from like what the workday looks like for a lot of people, how we shop, just everything is different, like capital D different. And so some of the rules that we played by when we were being raised or that our parents used when they were parenting don't really apply. The bigger picture values, I think, for sure do.
Yeah. And those things carry. Those things will carry, from how I was raised to how my children are raised to hopefully how they raise their children and so on and so forth. And it's part of that legacy that's left. But one thing I did want to talk about with you is those are my dogs. I'm sorry if you heard that squeal. Threw me off track. I'm trying to say this in like, because I have this really bad habit of saying things in not the most PC kind of way. But when it comes to parenting queer kids, and queer is kind of a blanket term, it's one that's not used very often on this podcast. But queer is kind of a blanket term for, at least as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, it's kind of a blanket term for the LGBTQIA plus community. It kind of encompasses all those different communities within that. And how I see it and how I perceived it is like, oh, well, I'm queer. Okay, cool. I get that. Cool. That's enough for me to leave it alone. Like, cool, you're queer? Cool. Anyways, what are we doing here today? So, but when it comes to parenting a queer kid or doing that, they're often not parented by those in the same minority, obviously, because their parents more than likely are heterosexual and brought them into a heterosexual relationship and marriage, and now they're not really across that same demographic. So how can a parent whose kid identifies would be the right term here, right? Identifies as queer. How can a parent through that and work with their kid through that? Of course, I have my ideas here where it's like, okay, well, it's still your kid. It's still your kid. You still live them the same. It doesn't really make them any different. So what? Girl likes girls, boy like boys, whatever. There's worse things that can happen. They could be on drugs, kind of thing. Like, it's really not that deep. I just kind of view it as like, let them go through it. Let them, if that's their choice right now, cool. If that's their choice in 10 years, cool. If that's not their choice in 11 years, cool. If it's just something they thought was something they maybe wanted and they explored it, didn't work out, cool. Now kind of thing. So I have a very kind of lax viewpoint on this, to where I don't see myself, if my kids ever come out to me as queer or gay or whatever, it's just going to be like, okay. And what do you want me to do with that information? It's going to be such a low reaction that it's just going to be like very underwhelming to them. And hopefully it doesn't have to get to that point where it's like a big coming out thing, where it's just a dinner table conversation. Hey, Dad, I think I'm queer. Okay, cool. What are we going to do with that information? What are we going to do from here? To where it's not like this big thing, this big scary thing for them. That's like the hope and dream.
Yeah.
To get to that point. But how can parents normalize, or how can we normalize parenting queer kids?
Well, I think you've hit on some really important points, right? So One, like the language can be really scary, right? Another way that it's different than when we were our kids' age, right? We were our kids' age, it was like there was gay or straight, right? And then bi came along, there was some bi people out there too. But that was kind of it. There was just like a handful of categories. And now there's like tons of languaging around it, tons of like really sort of fine, detailed descriptors. And it can be really overwhelming, and it's hard sometimes, especially if you have good intentions and you're like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Is this word okay? Is this not okay? But to be able to just say that, right? Like, I'm not sure if this is the right term, but this is what I'm trying to say, and asking, is this the right word? How does this work? I think that's a huge skill that's really important today. That works really great in terms of parenting queer kids. And I think your openness is really nice as well, right? And I'm seeing it more and more. Like there's kids now who aren't having to have the big coming out stories that a lot of people did in decades past, right? Because the parents are like, oh, instead of doing that, like, are there any girls you like at school, son? You know what I mean? To say, like, is there anybody that you like at school? Any girls or boys you like at school? And just kind of opening those gates, right? Just in case they need to be open someday. And then those kids can just say, yeah, his name's Billy, or yes, her name is Becky, whatever. And the parents are like, great, cool. And it doesn't have to be a big giant thing in the same way that it used to be, right? And I think that that's a great thing. And I really am interested in this part about the culture piece, right? Like there's some stuff about parenting a queer kid that is exactly the same as parenting a straight cisgender kid. And then there's some stuff that is very different, right? And it's hard for a lot of parents. Most Jewish kids grow up with Jewish parents. Most Black kids grow up with Black parents. But most LGBTQIA plus whatever kids grow up with straight parents. And so the parents don't necessarily know what they don't know. But I think, like any other culture, it's really important to understand the history, to understand the culture, to have some traditions going on. And so, it's up to the parents of queer kids to make those traditions, look into that history, immerse themselves in that culture, right? And some of them just don't really know how to do that. But there's some great books out there to do that. And we just cracked open the seal on June this year, Pride Month. So there's lots of events and things like that. There's lots of resources online for parents too. So, but I think that journey can be really hard.
Definitely. And it's one that you're not really like prepared for. I mean, you don't really think about that.
Right.
Like when you go into like having a kid, okay, if a man's having a kid, he's more than likely going to be having a child with a woman and vice versa. More than likely a biological child. Of course, it's different one area I don't understand 100%, and it's off topic, so I don't even bring it up. But like you're not prepared for how to handle that. Like you're barely prepared how to parent. You're not prepared how to parent at all. But
Right.
you were most likely raised by a heterosexual couple, and then they were raised by a heterosexual couple who didn't even know what gay was, and then they were raised by a heterosexual couple who only heard the word gay in books or when saying happy, or someone's name was Gaylord or something like that. So that's 3 generations back. And fast forward 3 generations, no one really knows how to handle it. Grandparents definitely don't know how to handle it. And because it's like something that just it was around. There were still gay people and lesbians and bi people forever. There always has been. I mean, you look back in Greek, Roman, ancient history, it was always there.
Yeah.
It was there then, it's there now.
We just didn't talk about it.
No, it just wasn't talked about. It was just recorded and kind of like tucked in there, just very like nonchalantly.
Right.
It was said in a way that was more like in Lisa Greek and Roman writings and stuff. It was said in a way that was like more poetic. So if you weren't really like looking for it or didn't really understand like what it meant, you was like, oh, that's a cool line. They're just writing poetry. No, they're literally talking about sex and doing things to each other. The soldiers and things like that were doing things to each other, and they fulfilled their needs and things like that. And then you're like, kind of thing.
Veil gets pulled back a little bit.
Exactly. Glass shattering, break breaking the world kind of thing. But it's important to kind of just have those again, it goes back to the whole kind of theme here, conversation. You got to have those conversations with your kids and changing the language around it. Like, hey, is there anybody you like? Um, of course, maybe depending on your values and religious beliefs and things like that, maybe your little Johnny will say, "Oh yeah, little Susie's super cute," and maybe you'll breathe a breath of fresh air, and you'll be fine. You'll be like, "Okay, cool." Not a road I'm gonna have to take. But even then, even if you, I guess a spring off question from here. Let's say you, and I'm sure you have heterosexual children who like the opposite gender, and boys that like girls, girls that like boys, kind of thing. How do you help create like a spirit of like empathy and acceptance among them to have with their peers who don't like this, like who like the same gender, who are queer? Like, how do we help as parents? How do we help our children create that empathy and create that like acceptance and tolerance?
I think probably modeling it to them is the biggest thing, right? And kind of preparing for it, like just trying to be ready, right? Especially if you are, the kind of parent who struggles with it or never met any gay people that you know of, or, just kind of preparing yourself just in case that issue comes up with your kids. Like, you don't want to have to be sort of thinking about how am I going to handle this when your kid is 12 and comes out at Thanksgiving or something like that. You don't want that to be the first time you've entertained these thoughts, right? But like just kind of telegraphing to your kids when they're little that like that anything that they want to do, they can, like you said in the beginning, right? You can come talk to me. I will protect you. You can always ask me questions, and just being open and just making sure that that extends to literally to all the places. As parents, we all have crazy things happen. Like there's no way to prepare to be a parent, right? Like I had a kid whose appendix burst when he was 9, right? It took us a while to even figure out what was going on. We had no template for that, no experience for that, right? I had a kid who decided they were a vegetarian when they were 11, right? And went vegetarian for 7 years. Like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, how do you prepare for that? You don't. But when your kid comes and says, I'm a vegetarian, then you go, okay, let's figure out how to do that. And we'll do that well, right? And it's the same kind of thing, right? Like little Johnny might come and say, I've got a new friend, Timmy, who seems really cool. Okay, let's figure out how to do this and how to do it well, right? All parents have those muscles. We use them all the time, right? So there's no reason we can't use that around sex and gender stuff too. We have the muscle set already.
100%. And I think it's like, let's figure out how to do this and how to do it well. I really like that idea right there. Like, let's figure out how to do it. And let's figure out how to do it well, because we want to do right by our kids. Of course, we want them to make sure that they are successful and that they have the tools and skill sets they need. And I think that modeling is a huge part of it too, because I am a firm believer, and no one can really change my mind on this. Hate is taught. Just tolerance and unacceptance and hate, these things are taught. They don't just happen. They don't just pop up. They're not genetic. They're taught. They're learned. They're learned behaviors. They're learned words. They're learned phrases. They're not just.
I absolutely believe that.
They're not just surprise. Your kid's hateful towards someone else. They 100%. These ideas. Like, I was listening to a podcast today, and it may not really fit the theme, but it fits kind of like this idea here. So I was listening to Patrick at David, the PBD podcast. It's one of my favorite podcasts I listen to on a regular basis. Politics, things like that. He had this leader. He's like 24 years old, but like he's like the leader of this, like more or less this white America group kind of thing. This white patriot group kind of people, not the KKK, not anything that drastic, or not really MAGA related either. Kind of just white patriots. And so what PPD was getting at was like, where he kept asking him, where did this idea come from? Who instilled this in you? Who put these ideas in your head at a young age? Because there's no way that at 17 you had the ideas to create a group and to protest and to get into all
Right.
these politics and things like that. Like there's no possible way that you could do this kind of thing. And also shout out PBD. If PBD listens to this podcast, thank you. And also like I would love to come work for Valuetainment. Anyways, but it's like these ideas that our kids have, hate, unacceptance, distolerance, derogatory remarks, derogatory thoughts, racism, hate, all these things, they all come from you as a parent, from whoever they're around the most, parents,
Yeah.
grandparents, caregivers, aunts, uncles, cousins, like where they're getting this information from. Because yes,
100%. You know, it's June, and like on social media, like it's Pride Month, so they're coming out of the shadows, like terrible people saying terrible things. I'm just like blocking and reporting like a dozen times a day, right? And it's June 3rd. And
yeah,
so, you know, and those guys, like that hate, that bigotry, they weren't born
that's the
that way.
word I
Like
was
that,
looking for,
they learned that.
bigotry.
They were
I was
made,
looking for
right?
that word.
Yeah. But it reminded me of like back to your previous question about just sort of like how do you help kids understand like that it's okay and you're a safe space. You know, part of that thing that I tell parents a lot is just listen to your kids. Like Gen Z is better at this than we are. Like a lot of them, they don't give a crap. Like if their friend likes boys or girls or is a boy or a girl or was or now is something different, like they don't really care. It's just like, it's just part of their life to them. It's a lot of us that come with like the previous training and the people that taught us and the things we learned growing up, that we come with all this baggage of this stuff. Like kids, they don't really care, right? And so
100%.
we can learn from their modeling actually how to be more tolerant sometimes.
100%. And you know, it's true to the saying, like kids don't see color, kids don't see gender, kids don't see anything wrong with their peers until it's pointed out to them by someone that they love and trust, kind of thing.
Right.
Like if you just go with it and you're cool with everyone and you don't discriminate based on race, gender, sexuality, what all the things that you can, then your kid's never really going to see those things. You can have conversations and help them understand. They're like, "Hey, Dad, you know, my friend Sally, she told me she likes girls today," and I was like, "I'm kind of confused by that. Like, why does she like girls? I don't have a problem with it. I'm just like confused by it." They have more of that reaction kind of thing, and they still
Right.
tell you those, and they're still having that conversation with you, and then that's an opportunity for you to say, "Well, that means that she's, you know." That's kind of the blanket term we've been using today. That means she's queer. You know, it means that she has feelings, she likes other girls, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Does it change how you feel about Sally? No. Is it going to affect your friendship? No. Are you going to be uncomfortable being around her? No. Does she like you? I don't think so. Okay, have you asked her? No. Would it help if you did ask her? Maybe. Okay.
Yeah, exactly what you're doing, right? Like listen to what they're saying, ask questions, and like let them know that you're there for them. Like that's more than half the battle.
Yeah. That's like majority of the battle here. Um and so it's super important just to have those open conversations with your kids and to be willing to have them, because there will always be opportunities for them, but your kids will come to you with, and it starts when they're young. I firmly believe this too. Like they're not going to come to you when they're a teenager if they can't come to you when they're 7, 8, 9 years old. And when they're
Yeah.
trying to come to you with these things, like their questions or things like that, and they're just off put or they're ignored or things like that. And as they get older, the more and more that happens, the less and less they're going to come to you. And then the more and more
Exactly.
they're going to get information from other. And it's just this like vicious cycle. Uh, so I guess the theme here is have conversations with your kids. Um, and having the conversations with them, because it's a teaching opportunity. Part of our role as parents, especially part of our role as dads, is to be teachers, is to be mentors, is to be coaches. Literally and figuratively, we can coach, we can mentor, and we can teach. Some of you guys listen to this podcast, some of you guys are teachers. That's awesome. Guess what? You have a better advantage of teaching a child more than I do. Um, kind of thing. We all have different skill sets, and you got to play to your strengths. And if you are in a supportive relationship, you guys get to play to each other's strengths, and it's like a kind of a 2-for-1 special there. But both parents have to be willing to have the same conversation. So you even have to back it up further, I think, is that if this conversation was to happen, how are we going to react? How is that conversation going to look? What are the things that we're going to say? What are your thoughts on it? What are my thoughts on it? Because maybe,
And
you know,
values.
we know we have family values, but maybe we have different beliefs on this one specific thing. Or that can be when it comes to politics. Maybe your kid's be coming up on voting age and they can vote in an election. And it's like, okay, well, Billy feels like what if Billy expresses he wants to vote more Republican and we're more Democratic or vice versa? Like, it's his vote, but how do we have that informed conversation with him about it?
Right.
And help him understand, like, okay, look at your options, look at your resources, this is how you do research, these are kind of things you do. It kind of goes back to an area that you kind of mentioned before, but like digital citizenship is to
Hmm.
helping them create like digital citizenship, like teaching them how to look up information and like the resources and things to like get it from. Because Dr. Google isn't always right. A great resource actually is like Chat GPT because it will give you like the sources, like it's pulling the information from if you ask it. You can ask it a question, okay, cool. What's that source? Is it an academic journal? Does it have that little DOI at the end, or was it just some random blogger kind of thing that is pulling this information from? But you can also keyword search it into ChatGPT. Give me academic resources to help me learn about the Republican and the Democratic parties. Boom, drops all that information for you. Academic based research, all these legit journals, things like that. We can help our kids create that level of citizenship and help
I
them
think that's a really
understand.
big part of digital citizenship too.
Mhm. So, how do we help instill more of those like digital citizenships and help kind of combat what a lot of parents see as like screen addiction? There's a lot of challenges in this area between digital citizenship and screen addiction. So, what are some of the solutions that we can do to help offer some relief in this area?
Well, the screen addiction issue is a little bit controversial. Like even in my field, there's some division in it, right? Like there's some people who really stand by the concept of screen addiction, and others like me, full disclosure, like don't really think that's a thing. I understand like there's dynamics, like there's problematic use that people have. People can even experience things that kind of look like withdrawal if they have really intense use and then they pull back after a while. But when you boil it down to the bones, what we see more is like obsessive issues, right? So it ends up looking more like an eating disorder or something like that, rather than like a true addiction. Working to avoid like problematic screen use when kids are young, talking about like the issues around overuse of screen, the value of unplugging every once in a while, instilling those kinds of concepts and values in kids when they're young, I think is really important. And then as they get older, just being able to support them, right? If you do have a kid who leans a little bit obsessive, a lot of times they do it in other areas of life too. It's not just about their screens. And so talking to professionals, getting them the help that they need. There's lots of people that work in this area. Screen addiction, video game addiction, porn addiction. That's very sellable. Like there's a lot of professionals that do good work, but it says porn addiction on their little signpost or whatever. That's fine. It's a way to get people's attention, and then they know what they're going for. But there's lots of treatment modalities that people can use to help with things like that. But as parents, I think just learning how to create limits, following through even when it's hard, right, with screen time and things like that, and then just talking about the negative effects, especially if you see them starting to play out, like kids pulling away from their friends, wanting to like be alone in their room with their screen rather than hanging out with other humans, kids getting really upset or throwing fits, things like that if you have to turn off the video games, like not being able to unplug, like those kind of red flag stuff, to just start doing interventions then before it gets kind of blown out of proportion.
Definitely. No, it makes sense. And it's important. And again, it kind of wraps into like the overarching theme of this episode is to make sure that you're informed on what to look for, but also to like have those conversations on like what that healthy usage looks like within your home. Because you
Yeah.
mentioned it earlier, like what are those limits and what are those boundaries? Like if my daughter, if she decides to jump on the computer and she asks me like, "Hey, I want to do," there was like a point in time where she was like obsessed with doing animal research for like 2 weeks on end. And so she just wanted to jump on the computer and research an animal and dabble around with Google and things like that. And that's fine. I pulled up the different websites for her. I'm like, okay, I'm going to put you on a website. If you want to change your website, call me, ask me, I'll change your website for you so you can find different stuff.
Mhm.
Um, so making sure we're guiding through that process as well, of course. So another
And
very
again, we
important.
have those parenting muscles. We do it all the time. We do it with homework. We do it with sugar cereal. Right? We do it with chores. We talk about limits. We talk about expectations. We do it with bedtimes. Right? There's no reason that we can't do it with screens, but there's a lot of parents who just don't. Like a third, statistically, a third
Mhm.
of parents in America have zero rules about screen time in their houses, and it's a big problem, right? Like we wouldn't do that with power tools. We definitely wouldn't do it with a car. Like why would we do it with the whole damn internet, right? But a lot of people do. There's this thing like where you get your cell phone for your 13th birthday or whatever, and then there's just like no conversation about it. Or people have conversations about like the cost or using a screen protector and making sure it's
Yeah,
charged, like
the
that kind of
wrong
stuff.
conversation.
Right. But I mean those are important, right?
Those
But
are
like
important,
not
yeah.
about like who are you connecting with? How are you treating people on the other side of those lines?
Mhm.
Like, what are the boundaries in terms of time or space? Like, what websites are you going to? Where are you getting your information? And what are you using that information for? Those kinds of things are super important. And, again, like a lot of us didn't have parents that had to have that conversation with us,
Mhm.
right?
So
So
it was
we're,
never
we're like,
modeled for us.
yeah, it was never modeled. And so I understand like it can be really hard to have those conversations, but a lot of it, like we've said the whole time, it's just about communication and knowing your kid and and knowing what they're doing. Like I tell my kids, like the internet isn't a thing, it's a place that you go to and there's people there. And so when they would get upset and I'd be like, you're 8, you know what I mean? Like you don't get to just like cross the street by yourself yet. I'm not going to take you to the airport and just drop you off and just
Right.
see what you do and where you go and who you interact with. Like, and it's the same thing. Like, you're not just going to go to a website that I don't know and just start interacting with people that I don't know. You know what I mean? And so they can start to wrap their brain around that, right? But if we can treat what they do and how they do it on their screens in a very similar way to how we do in the real world, I think that is the better stance to take, right? Because, I've got parents who are like, my kid's not getting a cell phone until they're 30. And I get it. Like, I can understand people not wanting to do that, but it doesn't help kids. We don't do that to them in real life, right?
No.
We don't wait till they're 16 before we take them to a restaurant. We take them when they're little. They freak out, they spill their spaghetti, we have to get our food to go sometimes because the kids can't handle it or whatever. Like those
Yeah.
things happen, but through those experiences our kids learn how to behave in our restaurants, right? And
Yep.
so we need to be able to let them interact with screens but be there with them and do it and learn and have those conversations, let them screw up, recalibrate, have conversations, start again, and then they learn how to be good digital citizens, right?
Mhm.
um, so
100%.
that's my philosophy and kind of what I help parents do a lot of the time.
I love that. And it's kind of like it's not a coincidence at all, but I was at T-Mobile today and I upgraded my phone from an iPhone 12 to an iPhone 15. I know. I got 3 years updated in one day. I know, amazing. But while I was there was this older gentleman there. He's probably in his 40s and he was there getting his son a phone. And he was talking about it. He's like, "Yeah, I don't understand this stuff. Like, I know my way around a car. Like, I have an '09 out there, best car I ever had. Absolutely love it. I know my way around the car. I know my way around the house. I know my way around with tools. But man, when it comes to this technology, I have no clue. That's why I'm here, kind of thing." And I'm like, man, I hear you. Like, I'm so. He's like, yeah, like your generation and stuff. I'm like, man, even I struggle with it. Like, there's some things my daughter can do on my computer that I don't understand how she's even doing it. Like, I didn't even know she could read, but my daughter's a great reader. But that's besides the point. Like even my 3-year-old can like do just all the things with tablets and phones, like just
Yeah.
with naturally, and it's crazy. And it's like you're doing the right things right now. Like there's this amazing place wherever you get your phone from, you can take when you get your kid's phone from, you can go back to that phone store or call their customer service line and say, "Hey, can you help me set up parental controls?" You can do the same
Mhm.
thing with your PlayStations. You can do the same thing with your Xboxes, with your Switches. You can call
YouTube
Sony,
has great videos.
YouTube. Yep. You can call all these customer services department, or you can go down to Best Buy or Geek Squad or T-Mobile or Verizon or wherever you're getting your devices from, and you can say, "Hey, can you show me how to set up parental controls on this device and how to link it to my phone so I can control it from my phone?" Because guess what? All those apps and things that you can get, you can turn off the service on their phones. You can put
Yep.
time limits on the apps they use. You can limit what apps they can download. You can limit their permissions and things like that to where it'll give you a notification if they're trying to go around it or anything. And then that gives you another opportunity for a conversation. Say, "Hey, I noticed that you were," or of course you can give them the opportunity first. "Hey, did you try to do anything on your phone today that I should know about?" Kind of thing. And I think it's totally appropriate, at least for me, while my kids are under my roof, there's going to be a conversation from very early on when they get their phones, like, "Hey, when you're under my roof until you move out," and this is something that may come off as like authoritarian or anything like that, but it's like, "While you're under my roof, I can check your phone whenever I want,"
Hmm.
kind of thing.
Price of admission.
Like that's my
Yep.
phone. I'm gonna hold the power card over them and say, "Hey, I pay for it. You're living in my house, so I'm still paying your bills. I'm paying for your food. Even if you get a job and you start paying for your food, guess what? I'm still gonna check your phone." And you start paying for your phone, I'm still gonna check it. You're in my house, you're living under my roof. I don't care.
Yep.
And that's gonna be the conversation from early on. But staying consistent, keeping up with those routine checks and things like that, I think are other ways to help them learn that, oh shoot, well I have to be accountable for this. But then making sure this is something I call the consequence scale. What are your consequences going to be if those things are breached? And of course, there's different apps and programs and things like that that you can install. You can control what apps are on the phone. Most phone companies offer like an older model iPhone as like the first starter phone kind of thing. A kid phone, it
I'm a
already
big
comes.
fan of that too. Like your kids should never have better tech than you do,
No,
right? Like you should
mm-mm.
not have the iPhone 12 and they have the 15. Like that's doing
No,
it
it should be
backwards,
the
right?
other way around. Yeah.
They get your hand-me-downs when you upgrade. Yeah, like that. I think
Yep.
I'm a big fan. And and then beyond that, like this is a great conversation to be having with them about consequences and expectations, but
Mm-hmm.
then really solidifying it. Like I'm a huge fan of contracting for behavior, like sitting down as a family, as a team. What are our rules? What do we think is appropriate? What do we think is inappropriate? What's a good amount of time to be on Instagram every day? And you literally write it out. I've got on my website, I've got templates of like family contracts for things, including smartphones, being online. Kids are much more likely to follow the rules if you can get them to sit down and come up with the rules with you, and way less likely to complain about the consequences when they get them, which they will because they're kids, right?
Yeah,
If they help come
inevitably.
up with the consequences, and then the rules
Mhm.
are just taped up on the fridge right there, right? Like it's a
Yeah.
really great parenting hack.
Yeah, and then there's no discussion on it after that, and it's like, well, you literally came up with this rule, and then you literally broke this rule, so you
Exactly.
literally kids love to say literally, and it's like you're literally getting the consequence that you came up with for yourself. So,
Right.
sorry, phone for 3 days, please. Um, or I'm taking away your YouTube time, about I'm shutting it down to 20 minutes a day kind of thing. So use it very wisely until I feel you earn it back. And remember the things that you can do to earn it back. Bada bing, bada boom, bada boom. You do those things for 2 weeks and they'll re-increase your time back kind of thing. So it's just that balance, but it makes it very simple and easy when your kids are on board and they're bought in. Because when they're on board and bought in, guess what? They're not going to break those rules because they know
Yep.
exactly what's going to happen, and they obviously don't want those things to happen.
I
So,
had a parent that I worked with years ago, and I've kind of passed it on, and had several parents do this too, where they get the kid the phone, they get two phones, they get like the cool iPhone or whatever, and then they get the crappy like 2006 style flip phone,
they
and they
still
just
have
put
those.
it
Yep.
up on the fridge or whatever, right? Like here's the phone, these are the rules, and if you don't want to do it, then you can lug that thing around for a week in front of your friends, right? Like The kids aren't going to risk it. Right? Like,
No, they're
they,
not.
they don't want to have to do that.
No. All
And
right.
but it's good though, right? Like leaning into kids, like and saying, like, little kids don't get these devices. Like, I'm giving this to you because you're showing me some maturity, you're showing me self-control, you're showing me that you can handle it. So I'm giving you this phone because I trust you, and I want you to be leaning into that big kid that you know you want to be, right? And like encourage them to lead with that responsibility. But if they're like a kitty cat covering crap up and keeping secrets and doing stuff they're not supposed to on the phone, you just say, I'm so sorry. My fault. I thought you were ready for this. Here, we'll try again on your next birthday.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's
And
that
just
easy.
pull it back. Yeah, nobody ever died because you took their cell phone away.
No.
Right? But, kids respond to that kind of stuff, right? They want to be seen as mature. They want to be seen as responsible. They want the perks to come along with being the big kid, right?
100%. And absolutely do not give your kid a phone that you have not already put controls in on first.
Right.
No
Yeah.
matter their age, unless they're like in their 20s already and that's just what you're just getting them an upgraded phone or something, maybe put controls on it just to mess with them to see what they do, because that would be kind of funny. But like if you're giving your 8, 9, 10 to 15, your 8 to 15-year-old a phone, 8 to 17-year-old a phone, and they're still going to be living with you, I hope and pray that you're putting some kind of parental controls on that from the get-go before you even put it in their hand or show that to them whatsoever.
And a lot of parents, like, I get lots of phone calls and panic emails and things like that, and parents worrying about this app or that app and what do I do and how do I monitor, and which comes into play and can be really important sometimes. But what I tell parents a lot is like, just focus on the values and the behavioral expectations, the do's and the don'ts,
Mm-hmm.
and be really clear about it. And then it doesn't matter if they're on TikTok or if they're on Snapchat or whatever, because you told them how you are expecting them to be acting and who you're expecting them to be interacting with and what they're doing when they're interacting with those people. That bigger picture stuff is the more important part, right?
Yeah.
So
100%. All right. Well, we're gonna wrap up here. So I'm just gonna shout out one more of our sponsors that kind of goes aligned with this too. Speaking of digitalness and phones and apps and things like that, it's the June app, Joon. If you listen to the podcast for any duration of time, I absolutely am a big fan proponent of the June app. Do you have a kid with ADHD? Maybe you have a kid with autism. Maybe you have a kid with ADHD. Maybe you just have a kid that struggles with routine. Maybe you just have a kid who struggles with finding balance every day. Um, maybe any combination of those. Maybe you have a kid who's a little too obsessive and they obsess over the wrong things at the wrong time. So you just need to help get their obsessions in line and put together. The June app is the perfect app for you then. What it is it's a not behavior management app, but kind of a behavior management app to where you put in tasks with your child for what they're going to do every day, from chores to habits to routines to everything. If they struggle brushing their teeth, boom, that's a high value reward thing. They get a high value amount of coins, things like that. They then take these coins within the app and they go and spend them to take care of their pets. It's kind of like Tamagotchis in 2024. Super
yeah,
cool. And they take care of their pets. They earn things. They play games. All these things. Super cool. And the best part of it that I absolutely love is the June Parents app side of it, because your kid's going to put in that they clean the room. It's going to ping you a notification to go and verify that they clean the room. You go and verify that they clean the room and it's half-assed and it's not done very well. Guess what? They only get however many coins you feel that they actually earn from cleaning their room. You can customize the tasks. There's templates for tasks or all the amazing things. And you can try the app absolutely for free by following the link in the description. That's joon.app/youngdad. And you can try for free. And then with the code youngdad, you'll earn 25% off your annual subscription. So it's a fantastic deal. Highly recommend the June app. More than 1 million families, more than 10,000 therapists across the United States are using this app. They're based in my hometown of Oakland, California. So, of course, I got to shout out Oaktown. And yeah, so June app, get it, love it. Let me know how much you enjoy it. So, without any further ado, let's wrap this up. A few questions here, and they're all advice-based questions. What advice, just overall, do you have for, and there's going to be a theme here. What advice do you have for the young couple just kind of starting out, getting together, and figuring life out? Like a very core piece of relationship advice.
I think, like, I'm a big fan of values discussions, and there's apps, books, decks of cards to do that. Just like have really clear discussions about values. So, because kids will bring those out, like, you're going to have lots of opportunities once you do have kids, to have to like figure out what do we think about porn? What do we believe about kids having devices? What do we think about LGBTQ people? Like, like you're going to have to come up with all those things. So having those conversations when you're young is a great way to spend time in a relationship and get to know each other and then grow together as well. So I think that's what I would say.
I love
Good
that.
question.
Next one here is, you kind of brought it up there, but the young couple, like we're thinking young 2025 here. Young couple who just had their very first little baby. They're over their moon, they're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, but they're freaked out of their minds. They are absolutely freaked out of their mind. What advice would you give to that couple?
There are very few things as important as it feels like in this moment. Like, I remember being a first-time parent and like changing the diapers needed to be done a certain way and trying to get the kid to sleep with the hair dryer noises and all kinds of stuff. Like, it'll be fine. Like, you've got this. The amount of stress that you're stressing about, the right consistency of baby food or whatever, like you can turn the volume down on that. Like, it's fine. That is kind of what I would say to that, I think.
It's all gonna be okay. You're here.
It's all going
Reality's
to be
right
okay.
here. Let's figure
Yeah.
out what we need in this gap to get you back down to here, because that's ultimately where you gotta live. Is just right where it's at. I love that. And the last question here, or second to last question here, maybe third, second-ish. Okay, anyway, specifically to the young father, age 20 to 25. Maybe he has one, maybe two kids, but he's just very young. Frontal cortex isn't even developed yet, young. What is your advice specifically to a young father and to young dads out there?
I guess just making sure that you get to grow up too. I know about our lives can really kind of just get the pause button hit on them once the kids come, but making sure that you're staying connected to friends, making sure that you're staying physically active, making sure that you are also getting your needs met. Like, it's really hard as a guy to be there for the people that need us if we're not kind of taking care of our own house too. So there's the abyss. Like, some guys get really sort of selfish and self-centered with it, but just make sure that you're like taking care of yourself as well, so that you can be there in an aware, in the moment, positive way for the people that need you.
I love that. I love that. And lastly, do you have any final thoughts or advice just from anything we talked about today that you want to leave here for the listeners?
Our kids are smart, right? I'm in love with Gen Z in a really big way. They're going to change the world. They're going to save all of us. So if you've got kids who are in that cohort who are struggling with stuff, like, put them in the driver's seat sometimes. Ask them questions. What do they think? What are their values? What are they saying? What do they want? And let them, we don't always have to be the ones that lead these conversations, these big conversations with our kids. Sometimes we can start the conversation, but let the kids tell us what they think and know and believe. And that can be really, really enlightening sometimes.
I love that. And Gen Z, if you're unfamiliar with the generations, Gen Z is 1997, 1998 to 2012, 2013. So if you have a little one, well, they're probably little to you. They're always going to be little to you. But if you have a child born in that age range, or you were born in that age range, you're going to change the world, apparently, according to Joe. So the young dads that are of
Yeah.
that Gen Z that we're talking to, that are listening to this, you're changing the world for us old millennials and Gen Xers here. So you're saving the world for us. So thank you for your service there. But no, 100%. Put your kids in the driver's seat. Let them take control. I like to call that jumping on their train. So
Yeah, that's great.
they're the conductor of their train, and you're just along for the ride. Let them drive that train. Let them get on the rails. Let them get going. Let them get that steam going, and just enjoy the ride. Pretty much, just get on it with them. That's what you're there for, really. So just enjoy that train ride with them.
I
and
love
to
that.
get there. So, and then lastly, where can our listeners find more of you, your work, and keep up with you a bit more?
My website is beheroes.net. There's a little bit of information about me and what I do. I travel around a lot. I do talks with parents and other professionals around, like you said, that adolescent sexuality technology. I've got some books. The Pride Guide is the one that is kind of up right now that people are excited about. It's the first book in print that's like a puberty, growing up, safety, what's happening to my body, like book written specifically for LGBT youth. And then all of my books have sections in the back for the parents. And so with the Pride Guide, it's literally like a fifth of the book. It's a huge chunk of it that's just for parents, like how to do it well, vocabulary lessons, like all kinds of stuff in there. So yeah, if you are someone who is in need of that or knows somebody who is, like, it's definitely worth checking out.
100%. And those, of course, will be linked in the description of the episode for you to grab.
Awesome.
So,
Thanks.
but with that, thank you so much for joining me today, whatever time of day you're listening to this. Thank you so much for joining myself, Joe. Thank you so much for joining us today, myself and the listeners. Thank you to our listeners, of course, for tuning in. Don't forget, wherever you're listening to this, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're at, make sure you subscribe, do all the things to show that you support and love the podcast. Feedback is amazing. Comments, questions, those really fuel me, keep me going. Suggestions, guests, things like that really help fuel me. And of course, tune in for the next episode. And I will see you next time on the Young Dad Podcast.